Maya stood in front of Riverside High School, her backpack feeling heavier than it should. It was mid-October, and most students had already formed their friend groups back in September. Starting a new school halfway through the semester was never easy, but her family had just moved to this part of Los Angeles. And here she was. She took a deep breath and walked through the front doors. The hallways were exactly what she'd expected from every high school movie she'd ever seen. Lockers lined the walls, groups of students clustered together laughing and talking, and everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone except her. Maya clutched her schedule in her hand, trying to find room 204 for her first period English class. She was 15 years old, loved reading science fiction novels, and had a passion for biology that most kids her age found boring. But that was fine with her. She'd never been the type to need a huge social circle. A few good friends were enough. What made Maya most nervous wasn't the schoolwork or finding her classes. It was the conversation she'd had with her dad the night before. He'd wanted to call the school, let them know who he was, maybe even do a special introduction. But Maya had begged him not to. She wanted to be just another student, at least for a while. She wanted people to get to know her for who she was, not because of whose daughter she was. Her adoptive father had agreed, though she could tell it wasn't easy for him. He was protective, always had been since the day he'd brought her into his family 3 years ago. But he also understood her need for independence, for normalcy. Being the adopted daughter of a famous action movie star wasn't something Maya took for granted, but it also wasn't something she wanted to define her entire life. She found her English class and slipped into a seat near the back. A few students glanced at her with mild curiosity, but most were too busy chatting with their friends to pay much attention to the new girl. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, gave her a warm welcome and asked her to introduce herself to the class. Maya stood up, feeling dozens of eyes on her. "Hi, I'm Maya. My family just moved here from the valley. I like science and reading, and I'm excited to be here." Short and simple, she sat back down, relieved when Mrs. Rodriguez moved on to discussing their current book assignment. The morning passed without incident. Maya found her classes, took notes, and kept to herself. By lunchtime, she was starting to feel a bit more comfortable. The cafeteria was massive and loud, filled with the sound of hundreds of conversations happening at once. Maya bought a sandwich and found an empty table near the windows. She pulled out her biology textbook, planning to review the chapter they'd be covering in her afternoon class. She was so absorbed in reading about cellular respiration that she didn't notice the group of girls walking past her table, not until one of them stopped and made a comment loud enough for Maya to hear. "Look, the new girl is studying during lunch." "That's so sad." Maya glanced up. The girl who'd spoken was tall and blonde, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than Maya's entire outfit. She had that look about her, the kind of confidence that came from knowing everyone was watching her, wanting to be her friend or at least not be her enemy. Two other girls stood beside her, both dressed similarly, both looking at Maya with expressions that weren't exactly friendly, but weren't overtly hostile either. They were waiting to see how their leader would react, ready to follow whatever social cue she gave. Maya offered a small smile. "Just getting a head start on homework," she said, trying to sound casual. She'd dealt with popular girls before at her old school. Sometimes they were mean, sometimes they were nice, and sometimes they just ignored you. She was hoping for option 3. The blonde girl looked at Maya's textbook, then at her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, then at her modest clothes from Target. Her expression shifted slightly, and Maya couldn't quite read what she was thinking. "Well, good luck with that," the girl said, and walked away with her friends following behind her. Maya returned to her book, but the words on the page didn't register anymore. That brief interaction had left her feeling unsettled, though she couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the way the girl had looked at her, like she was sizing her up and finding her lacking. Maybe it was the tone of voice, friendly on the surface but with something else underneath. Or maybe Maya was just being paranoid because she was new and didn't know anyone yet. The rest of lunch passed quietly. Maya finished her sandwich and made her way to her locker before afternoon classes started. The hallways were crowded with students moving between classes, and Maya was trying to remember her locker combination when someone bumped into her from behind. Hard. Maya stumbled forward, dropping her biology textbook and nearly hitting her head on the locker. She caught herself and turned around to see who'd run into her. It was the same blonde girl from the cafeteria standing there with her phone in her hand, not even looking at Maya. "Oh, sorry," the girl said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "Didn't see you there." Maya bent down to pick up her book. "It's okay. No problem. You should really watch where you're standing," the girl continued, still looking at her phone. "The hallways get pretty crowded between classes. You'll learn." There was something pointed about the way she said it, like Maya was the one who'd done something wrong. A few students nearby had stopped to watch the interaction, curious to see if anything interesting would happen. Maya straightened up, holding her textbook. "I'll keep that in mind. Thanks." The blonde girl finally looked at Maya directly, and this time there was no mistaking the cold assessment in her eyes. She was making a decision about Maya, categorizing her, deciding what role she would play in this school's social hierarchy, and from the slight smirk that crossed her face, Maya had a sinking feeling she knew exactly where she was being placed. "See you around," the girl said, and walked away, her friends falling into step beside her. One of them glanced back at Maya with something that might have been sympathy, but she didn't say anything. Maya stood there for a moment, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself she was overreacting. It was just a bump in the hallway, just a brief conversation, nothing to worry about. But she'd seen enough teen movies and read enough books to recognize the beginning of something. She just hoped she was wrong. The afternoon classes went smoothly. Maya's biology teacher was enthusiastic and engaging, and she found herself actually enjoying the lesson on photosynthesis. Her last period was art class, and she discovered she had some talent for sketching that she hadn't known about before. When the final bell rang, Maya gathered her things and headed for the front entrance where her ride would be waiting. Her father had wanted to pick her up himself on the first day, but Maya had convinced him to send his assistant instead. She didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want dozens of students pulling out their phones to take pictures and videos. As she walked through the parking lot, she heard her name called out. "Maya, right?" She turned to see a boy about her age, slightly awkward-looking with curly dark hair and glasses. He had a friendly face and was carrying a massive backpack that looked like it might tip him over backward. "Yeah, that's me," Maya said. "I'm Tyler. I sit 2 rows behind you in chemistry class. Just wanted to say hi and welcome to Riverside. How was your first day?" It was such a simple, genuine question that Maya felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "It was okay," she said, still finding my way around. "It gets easier," Tyler assured her. "Well, sort of. The cafeteria is still a maze even for people who've been here since freshman year. Anyway, see you tomorrow." "See you," Maya replied, feeling a bit better. At least one person at this school seemed nice. The ride home gave her time to think about her first day. It hadn't been terrible, but it hadn't been great either. That blonde girl, Maya hadn't even caught her name, seemed like potential trouble. But maybe it would all blow over. Maybe they'd just ignore each other for the rest of the year, and Maya could focus on her studies and slowly make a few friends. When she got home, her father was waiting, eager to hear about everything. Maya told him about her classes, about the nice teachers, about Tyler who'd introduced himself. She left out the part about the blonde girl and the uncomfortable interactions. No need to worry him over what was probably nothing. "I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there," her dad said, pulling her into a hug. "I know it's not easy being the new kid, but you're strong, and you're smart, and you're going to do great." Maya hugged him back, grateful for his support even as she maintained her independence. "Thanks, Dad. I think it's going to be fine." She went to her room and started on her homework, pushing aside the nagging feeling that tomorrow might not be as easy as today. That the blonde girl's cold eyes had promised something Maya didn't want to think about, but for tonight she'd focus on the positive. She'd survived her first day at a new school. She'd made at least one potential friend. And she'd managed to stay under the radar, just another student trying to find her place. Tomorrow would take care of itself. Or at least that's what Maya told herself as she fell asleep, not knowing that her first day was just the calm before the storm. By the end of Maya's first week at Riverside High, she'd learned the blonde girl's name. Brittany Richardson, junior class president, captain of the dance team, and according to the whispers Maya had overheard, the unofficial queen of the school's social hierarchy. Her parents were both successful lawyers at a prestigious downtown firm, and Brittany never let anyone forget it. Maya had hoped their initial encounters were just awkward coincidences. She'd been wrong. It started small. Brittany would make comments just loud enough for Maya to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Some people really don't know how to dress for school," she'd say while walking past Maya in the hallway. Or, "I guess standards are different at other schools," when Maya answered a question in their shared history class. Maya tried to ignore it. She'd promised herself she wouldn't let one mean girl ruin her experience at a new school. She focused on her classes, kept her head down, and tried to be invisible. But Brittany seemed determined not to let that happen. The second week, things escalated. Maya was eating lunch alone again, reading a book about marine biology, when someone bumped her table. Hard. Her bottle of orange juice tipped over, spilling across the table and soaking into her backpack before she could grab it. "Oops," Brittany said, standing there with her tray. "My bad, these tables are so wobbly, aren't they?" Maya jumped up, trying to save her backpack, but the juice had already seeped into the front pocket where she kept her notebooks. "It's fine," she muttered, grabbing napkins from the dispenser and dabbing frantically at the fabric. "You should really be more careful," Brittany continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Wouldn't want to ruin your stuff." Several students at nearby tables were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained by the drama. No one said anything. No one stepped in to help. Maya felt her face burning with embarrassment as she gathered her soaked backpack and hurried out of the cafeteria. In the bathroom, she tried to clean out the juice, but several pages in her chemistry notebook were already stained and sticky. She stood there alone in the bathroom, fighting back tears of frustration. This wasn't just bad luck. This was targeted, and Maya had no idea why Brittany had decided to make her life miserable. The worst part was that every incident was designed to look like an accident. When Brittany knocked Maya's carefully constructed science project off the desk before class, she apologized profusely to the teacher, claiming she'd tripped. When she spread rumors that Maya thought she was too smart for everyone else, she did it through whispers and suggestions, nothing that could be directly traced back to her. Maya started dreading school. She'd wake up each morning with a knot in her stomach, wondering what fresh humiliation awaited her. She stopped eating in the cafeteria, instead finding quiet corners of the library where she could have lunch in peace. She avoided the hallways between classes as much as possible, taking longer routes to avoid running into Brittany. But the bullying followed her everywhere. Even the one place that should have been safe, the internet, became another battlefield. It happened during her third week at Riverside. Maya had been working on a presentation for English class, practicing her public speaking in front of the mirror in the bathroom during lunch. She didn't notice Brittany's friend come in, didn't see the phone camera recording her nervous rehearsal. By the end of the school day, the video was everywhere, posted on multiple social media accounts with captions mocking Maya's nervousness, her hand gestures, the way she stumbled over certain words. "New girl thinks she's giving an Oscar speech," one caption read. "When you take English class way too seriously," said another. Maya discovered it when she checked her phone after school and found her notifications exploding. Students she'd never even talked to were sharing the video, adding their own comments and jokes. Her carefully maintained privacy, her hope of just being a normal student, evaporated in an instant. She sat in the car, staring at her phone, watching the view count climb higher and higher. Her hands were shaking. This was different from the hallway comments and the spilled juice. This was public humiliation on a scale she'd never experienced before. That night at dinner, Maya barely touched her food. Her father noticed immediately. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Fine," Maya lied. "Just tired from homework." But she wasn't fine. She was drowning in embarrassment and hurt, wondering how she was supposed to show her face at school tomorrow, when hundreds of students had watched her most vulnerable moment turned into entertainment. She wanted to tell her father everything. Wanted him to call the school, talk to the principal, maybe even confront Brittany's parents. But she couldn't. She'd asked for this, the chance to handle her own problems, to be independent, to not rely on her father's fame to smooth her path. If she went running to him now after just 3 weeks, what did that say about her? So Maya said nothing. She went to her room, deleted all her social media apps, and tried to prepare herself for facing school the next day. It was worse than she'd imagined. The video had spread beyond just Riverside High. Students from other schools in the district had seen it. When Maya walked through the hallways, she could feel the eyes on her, could hear the whispers and giggles. Someone made the video their ringtone and played it loudly when Maya passed by in the hallway. In history class, when the teacher asked Maya to read a passage from the textbook, someone in the back row mimicked her nervous hand gestures from the video. The class erupted in laughter. Even the teacher seemed at a loss for how to handle it, simply asking for quiet and moving on. Maya made it through the day, but barely. She spent lunch hiding in a bathroom stall, eating a granola bar and trying to steady her breathing. She'd never felt so alone in her entire life. Tyler found her after school near the back entrance where fewer students gathered. "Hey," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say that what happened to you is really messed up. That video shouldn't have been shared. It's not right." Maya appreciated the gesture, but she was too raw to talk about it. "Thanks," and she managed. "I should go. My ride's here." But the bullying didn't stop with the video. If anything, it intensified. Brittany had found a weakness, and she pressed on it relentlessly. She started making comments about Maya's appearance, particularly her natural hair. "Must be nice not having to style your hair in the morning," Brittany said loudly in the bathroom while Maya was washing her hands. "Just wake up and go, right?" The comment was loaded with implications, with racial undertones that made Maya's stomach turn. Other girls in the bathroom shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Another day, Brittany questioned whether Maya had earned her spot in the advanced placement biology class. "I'm just saying sometimes schools have to fill certain quotas," she said during a group project, her voice just quiet enough that the teacher across the room couldn't hear. "Not saying that's your situation, but you know how it is." Maya felt like she'd been slapped. The implication was clear, ugly, and designed to undermine not just Maya's confidence but her very right to be there. To suggest that her academic achievements were somehow handed to her, rather than earned through hard work and dedication. She wanted to scream. Wanted to tell Brittany exactly who she was, whose daughter she was, what resources she had at her disposal to make this all stop. But she didn't, because deep down Maya knew that using her father's fame would only prove Brittany's point, that Maya needed special treatment, that she couldn't make it on her own merit. The teachers noticed something was wrong. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled Maya aside after English class one day. "Is everything all right, Maya? Your grades are excellent, but you seem withdrawn. If something's going on, you can talk to me." Maya forced a smile. "I'm fine, really. Just adjusting to a new school." But she wasn't fine. She was barely holding it together. At home, she'd lock herself in her room and let the tears fall, but at school, she maintained a mask of calm indifference. She wouldn't give Brittany the satisfaction of seeing her break. The breaking point came during gym class, 4 weeks after Maya had started at Riverside. They were playing volleyball, and Maya was on the opposite team from Brittany. Every time Maya touched the ball, Brittany found a way to make a comment. "Nice try," she'd say when Maya missed a serve. "Maybe volleyball isn't your sport," after a failed return. Then, during a particularly intense rally, Brittany spiked the ball directly at Maya's face. Maya saw it coming and tried to duck, but the ball hit her shoulder hard, knocking her backward. She landed awkwardly, pain shooting through her wrist. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Brittany rushed over, her face a mask of concern. But when she leaned down to help Maya up, she whispered so only Maya could hear, "You really should watch out. Accidents happen all the time in gym class." The threat was clear. This wasn't over. In fact, it was getting worse. Maya sat on the gym floor, cradling her wrist, surrounded by concerned classmates and a worried teacher, and realized she'd reached her limit. She couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Couldn't handle this on her own when it was consuming every moment of her day. That evening, she finally told her father everything. 3 months passed, and the change in the household was remarkable. The boys still had difficult moments. They were 6 years old and grieving, after all. But the constant warfare had ended. They listened to Grace, did their homework without major battles, and even started looking forward to her arrival each morning. Grace had become more than just their caregiver. She'd woven herself into the fabric of their daily lives in ways that felt natural and necessary. She knew that Ethan needed quiet time after school to decompress before starting homework. She understood that Caleb processed emotions through physical activity, so she'd take him to the park to run around when he was feeling overwhelmed. But Grace also noticed things about the house itself that troubled her. Despite the expensive furniture and beautiful decor, it felt cold, frozen in time. Rebecca's reading glasses still sat on the nightstand in the master bedroom. Her coffee mug remained in the cabinet, unwashed, exactly where she'd left it the morning she'd gone to the hospital for the last time. Family photos covered the walls, but they all stopped at the same point before she got sick. The boys' rooms were the only spaces that showed signs of life and change. Everywhere else felt like a museum exhibit. The Reeves family before. Grace understood the impulse to preserve everything. When her husband died, she'd kept his workshop untouched for almost a year, as if he might walk back in and pick up his tools. But eventually she'd realized that holding on to everything so tightly meant she couldn't hold on to anything new, couldn't move forward, couldn't heal. One Saturday, Grace's grandson Devin came to visit. She'd asked Jonathan's permission to bring him over, explaining that the boys might benefit from having a friend their own age. Jonathan had agreed, happy to see the twins actually excited about something. Devin was 8, all energy and enthusiasm, and he hit it off with the twins immediately. Grace watched as they played in the backyard, building some elaborate fort out of sticks and cardboard boxes. It was the first time she'd seen Ethan and Caleb really laugh in the 3 months she'd been there. Jonathan came home early from the office, drawn by the sound of children's laughter, something he'd almost forgotten his house could produce. He found Grace sitting on the back porch keeping an eye on the boys while working on some knitting. "They seem happy," Jonathan said, sitting beside her. "Devin's good for them," Grace said. "Sometimes kids just need other kids. Adults can only do so much." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the boys play. Then Grace said carefully, "Can I ask you something that might not be my place to ask?" Jonathan looked at her. "You can ask anything." "The house," Grace began slowly. "It's beautiful, but it feels stuck, like it's waiting for someone to come back." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Rebecca designed most of it. Chose the colors, the furniture, everything. I can't just erase her." "I'm not suggesting you erase her," Grace said gently. "But the boys need to feel like they're allowed to move forward. Like making new memories doesn't mean betraying the old ones." "I don't know how to do that," Jonathan admitted, his voice rough. "Everything in this house reminds me of her. Some days that's comforting. Other days it's suffocating. But I don't know what to change or how to change it without feeling like I'm giving up on her memory." Grace set down her knitting. "After my husband died, I kept everything exactly the same for a year. His clothes in the closet, his tools in the garage, his coffee cup on the counter. I thought if I changed anything, I'd lose him completely. Then one day my daughter said something that stuck with me. She said, 'Mama, Daddy's not in these things. He's in us, in our memories, our stories, the way we live our lives. Keeping his stuff isn't keeping him.'" Jonathan was quiet, absorbing this. "What did you do?" "I created a memory box," Grace said. "Saved the things that really mattered. Photos, letters, his favorite shirt that still smelled like him. Then I donated the rest. Not to erase him, but to make room to breathe. To let my kids and grandkids make new memories in my house without feeling like they were disturbing a shrine." She turned to look at Jonathan directly. "Your boys need to know it's okay to be happy again. To laugh, to play, to live. But they're taking their cues from you. If you're stuck, they think they have to be stuck too." Jonathan felt the truth of her words hit him hard. He'd been so focused on his own grief, on preserving Rebecca's memory, that he hadn't considered how his inability to move forward was affecting his sons. "I wouldn't even know where to start," he said. "Start small," Grace suggested. "Maybe we help the boys create a memory box for their mom. Let them choose what to save, what stories to keep. Make it something special, not something that makes the whole house feel like a place where people used to live instead of where people are living now." The following weekend, Grace helped the boys do exactly that. They found a beautiful wooden box at a craft store, and the twins decorated it with paint and drawings. Together they went through the house collecting things that reminded them of their mother. Her favorite scarf, a bottle of her perfume, photos, a recipe card in her handwriting for the cookies she used to make. As they worked, the boys told stories. "Remember when Mom accidentally dyed Dad's white shirt pink? Remember when she sang really loud and off-key in the car? Remember when she made us laugh so hard milk came out of our noses?" Grace listened and encouraged, helping them see that their mother lived in these memories and stories, not in the untouched coffee mug or the frozen-in-time decor. By the end of the day, they had a box full of treasures and a house that felt slightly less like a museum. Jonathan's mother, Eleanor, visited the following Tuesday and immediately noticed the changes. The coffee mug was gone. Some of the photos had been rearranged. The boys' memory box sat on a shelf in the living room where they could access it whenever they wanted. "What happened here?" Eleanor asked, her tone disapproving. "Where are Rebecca's things?" "We created a memory box for the boys," Jonathan explained. "A place where they can keep their mother's memory without the whole house being a shrine." Eleanor turned to Grace, who was in the kitchen preparing snacks for the boys. "Was this your idea?" Grace met her gaze calmly. The boys needed a way to honor their mother while still feeling like they could move forward. "Yes, I suggested it, I see." Eleanor's voice was cold. "And you think you have the right to make those kinds of decisions? To change how this family remembers Rebecca?" "Mom," Jonathan said firmly, "Grace was helping us. The boys needed this. I needed this," but Eleanor wasn't finished. She'd been holding her concerns about Grace for months now, watching as the housekeeper, no, the nanny, or whatever she was, became increasingly central to her son's household. It made her uncomfortable for reasons she didn't fully want to examine. "You've become very involved with this family," Eleanor said to Grace. "Perhaps too involved. You're an employee, not a family member." Grace didn't flinch. "I'm aware of my role, Mrs. Reeves. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're making decisions that should be made by family. Changing the house, influencing the boys, spending time here even on weekends apparently." She gestured toward the backyard where Devon was playing with the twins. "That's my grandson," Grace said quietly. Jonathan gave permission for him to visit. "How convenient," Eleanor said, her meaning clear even if she didn't spell it out. "You bring your family into my son's home, make yourself indispensable, reorganize everything to suit your preferences. One might wonder what your ultimate goal is here." The accusation hung in the air. Jonathan felt anger flash through him. "That's enough, Mom, is it?" Eleanor turned to her son. "Do you not see what's happening? You've given this woman complete control over your household, your children. Have you thought about how this looks?" "How what looks?" Jonathan demanded. Eleanor lowered her voice. "You're a wealthy, recently widowed man. She's your employee. You need to be careful about appearances, about people who might take advantage of your situation." Grace stood very still, her face carefully neutral, but Jonathan could see the hurt in her eyes. This was what she'd feared from the beginning, that her growing closeness to this family would be seen as opportunistic rather than genuine. "You need to leave," Jonathan said to his mother, his voice shaking with anger. "Right now." "Jonathan, I'm only thinking of you and the boys. You're thinking about what the people at your country club might say," Jonathan interrupted. "You're worried about appearances and prejudices that have nothing to do with what's actually happening in this house. Grace has done more for me and my sons in 3 months than anyone else has done in 2 years. She's not taking advantage of anything. She's being a good person, doing a good job." Eleanor grabbed her purse. "You're making a mistake. You'll see that eventually." She left without saying goodbye to the boys. After she was gone, Jonathan found Grace in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I'm sorry," he said. "She had no right to say those things. She's worried about you," Grace said quietly. "I understand that." She was out of line, and what she implied was... Jonathan struggled for words. "It was prejudiced and wrong and completely unfair to you." Grace turned to face him. "Was she completely wrong, though? I've gotten very involved with your family. Maybe too involved. Maybe I've overstepped." "You haven't," Jonathan said firmly. "You've done exactly what I needed someone to do. Care about my sons as people, help us heal. Treat us like a family instead of a job. But if my mother's attitude makes you uncomfortable, if you want to set clearer boundaries, I understand." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is, I do care about your boys, about your family, more than I probably should for someone in my position, and that does make things complicated." "Complicated how?" Jonathan asked. But before Grace could answer, the boys came running in from the backyard, full of excitement about the game they'd been playing. The moment passed, the conversation left unfinished. That night, after Grace had gone home, the boys were getting ready for bed when Caleb asked, "Dad, why was Grandma angry?" Jonathan should have known they'd overheard. She wasn't angry, just worried. "About what?" Ethan pressed. "About me, about you two, about changes." She doesn't like Grace, Caleb said bluntly. I could tell. Jonathan sat on the edge of Ethan's bed. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about things. Grandma's having trouble with how much our family is changing. But we like how we're changing, Ethan said. Grace makes things better. I know, Jonathan said. And that's what matters. But as he left their room, Jonathan couldn't shake his mother's words. Not because he agreed with her prejudiced implications, but because she'd touched on something real. Grace had become essential to their lives. More than an employee, more than a caregiver. She was becoming part of their family. And Jonathan didn't know what to do with that realization. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Eleanor, Jonathan's world turned upside down. A major investment his firm had made, one he'd personally championed, went catastrophically wrong. A company they'd invested millions in was revealed to be cooking their books, and the scandal sent shockwaves through the financial world. Jonathan spent 3 days barely sleeping, meeting with lawyers and accountants trying to determine the full extent of the damage. The firm wouldn't go under, but his personal reputation was taking a beating. Clients were pulling their accounts. Partners were pointing fingers. The stress was crushing. He started staying later at the office, coming home after the boys were already asleep. When he was home, he was distracted, short-tempered, not really present. Grace watched with concern as he unraveled, saw the boys notice their father's distress even if they didn't understand it. The twins started regressing. Small things at first, refusing to do homework, arguing over dinner, trouble sleeping. They could feel the instability in their world again, and it scared them. Grace did her best to maintain their routine, to provide the stability their father couldn't give them at that moment, but she worried about all of them. One evening, Jonathan came home at 9 o'clock to find Grace still there, though she usually left at 6. She was sitting in the living room with a book waiting for him. The boys okay? He asked, loosening his tie. They're fine. Worried about you, but fine. Grace set down her book. You look exhausted. I am exhausted. Jonathan collapsed into a chair. I'm sorry for all the late nights. I know this wasn't part of what you signed up for. I'm not worried about my job description, Grace said. I'm worried about you. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Jonathan tried to remember. I had coffee this morning. Grace stood up. Kitchen now, I saved you dinner. Too tired to argue, Jonathan followed her. She reheated the meal she'd made for the boys earlier. Pot roast with vegetables, the kind of home cooking he hadn't had in months. As he ate, Grace sat across from him with a cup of tea. You want to talk about what's happening? She asked gently. And suddenly, unexpectedly, Jonathan did want to talk. The words came pouring out. The failed investment, the accusations, the fear that he'd let everyone down. His partners, his clients, his sons, the terror that he'd lose everything he'd worked so hard to build. Rebecca always said I worked too much, Jonathan said, his voice breaking. That I cared too much about the business, about success, about proving something. And she was right. I spent so much time building this career, this reputation, and now it's crumbling. And the worst part is that I'm terrified my boys will see me as a failure. Grace let him talk, didn't interrupt or try to fix anything, just listened with the same calm presence she brought to everything. When he finally ran out of words, she spoke. My husband was a mechanic, Grace said. Had his own shop, built it from nothing. He was so proud of that place. Then the economy crashed in 2008 and he lost almost everything. Had to sell the shop, go work for someone else. It killed him, honestly. The stress, the feeling like he'd failed. That's what the heart attack took, but the pride had already gone. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. But you know what I learned from watching him? Success isn't about the business or the money or the reputation. It's about how you treat the people who depend on you when things get hard. Are you honest? Do you take responsibility? Do you put your family first? Jonathan looked at her. I feel like I'm letting my sons down. I can't focus on them right now. I'm barely keeping it together at work. You're not letting them down, Grace said firmly. You're showing them what it looks like when someone faces difficulty with integrity. They're watching how you handle this crisis, and that's going to teach them more about character than any success story would. I don't know how to fix this, Jonathan admitted, and he wasn't sure if he meant the business crisis or his life in general. You can't fix everything, Grace said. Nobody can. You do your best, you clean up what you can, and you move forward. That's all any of us can do. They sat in the kitchen talking until after midnight. Grace shared stories from her own life. Raising 3 kids on a tight budget, working multiple jobs after her husband died. the times she'd felt like she was failing but kept going anyway. Jonathan found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone since Rebecca died. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months," Jonathan said finally. "You've held this family together when I couldn't." Grace smiled slightly. "That's what I'm here for, is it though?" Jonathan asked. "Because it feels like more than that. You're not just the nanny or the housekeeper or whatever title we're supposed to use. You're—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "I'm what?" Grace asked softly. But before Jonathan could answer, his phone rang. It was his lawyer with an update on the case. The moment passed and Grace quietly gathered her things and left while Jonathan took the call. Over the next week, the business situation began to stabilize. Not resolve, but stabilize. Jonathan implemented damage control, settled with angry clients, restructured his partnerships. It was painful and expensive, but survivable. He'd learned a hard lesson about risk management and ego-driven decisions. But the personal situation remained complicated. Jonathan found himself thinking about Grace constantly. The way she'd waited for him that night, made sure he ate, listened without judgment. The way she cared for his sons, not as a job, but as if they were her own grandchildren. The way her presence in his home had transformed it from a museum of grief into a place where people actually lived and laughed. He was falling in love with her. Or maybe he'd already fallen and was just now admitting it to himself. The problem was he had no idea if she felt the same way. And even if she did, how could they navigate the massive complications, the employer-employee dynamic, the differences in their backgrounds, the judgment they'd face from people like his mother? His sister Patricia arrived from Boston that weekend, ostensibly to check on how he was handling the business crisis, but within an hour of arriving it became clear she had other concerns. "Mom called me," Patricia said over coffee Saturday morning while the boys played upstairs. "She's worried about you." "Mom's always worried about something," Jonathan said tiredly. "She says you've become too dependent on your nanny, that this woman has too much influence over your household." Jonathan felt anger flash through him. Her name is Grace, and she's the best thing that's happened to this family in 2 years. Patricia raised her eyebrows. "That's exactly what concerns Mom. And honestly, Jonathan, it concerns me too. I know you've been through a lot, but you need to think about how this looks." "How what looks?" "You're a wealthy man who's recently lost his wife," Patricia said carefully. "You've hired a woman who now essentially runs your household, cares for your children, is here constantly. People will talk. They probably already are talking. Let them talk," Jonathan said. "Grace is professional, competent, and she genuinely cares about me and the boys. Why should I care what people think?" Patricia leaned forward. "Because perception matters, especially in your line of work. Especially now when you're trying to rebuild your reputation. And because I think you're not seeing this situation clearly." "This woman—" "Grace," Jonathan interrupted. "Her name is Grace. Fine. Grace. She's in a position of power in your home. She's made herself indispensable. And Jonathan, I have to ask, have you thought about what her motivations might be? You're vulnerable right now, emotionally and financially. And she's an employee who's gotten very comfortable in a lifestyle well above what she could afford on her own." The implication was clear, and it made Jonathan furious. Grace isn't after my money or trying to manipulate me. She's a good person doing her job well. "Maybe," Patricia said. "Or maybe she's seen an opportunity and taken it. I'm not saying she's a bad person, but you need to be realistic about the power dynamics here. She's your employee. There's an inherent imbalance that makes any deeper relationship inappropriate." Eleanor arrived later that afternoon, joining forces with Patricia. Together they presented a united front. Grace needed to be let go, or at the very least, clear boundaries needed to be established. This situation was unhealthy, they insisted. Unfair to Grace, inappropriate for Jonathan, and confusing for the boys. "What if you're misreading the situation?" Eleanor asked. "What if she has no romantic interest in you at all, and you're putting her in an uncomfortable position by blurring these professional lines?" That possibility hadn't occurred to Jonathan, and it stopped him cold. What if Grace saw him only as an employer? What if she was just good at her job and he'd read more into her kindness? He'd be putting her in a terrible position if he confessed feelings she didn't return. The boys came downstairs in the middle of this family meeting, confused about why their aunt and grandmother were there looking so serious. Ethan heard part of the conversation from the doorway. "You want to fire Grace?" Ethan's voice was small and scared. Everyone turned to see both twins standing there, their faces stricken. Caleb's eyes were already filling with tears. "No, sweetheart," Jonathan said quickly. "No one's firing anyone. But they want you to," Caleb said, pointing at Eleanor and Patricia. "They think Grace is bad. But she's not bad. She's the only one who stayed. She's the only one who's nice to us." Ethan looked at his grandmother with an anger Jonathan had never seen in his 6-year-old son. "You made all the other nannies leave. You didn't like any of them. And now you don't like Grace either. But we like her. We love her. And if Dad makes her go away, I'll never forgive him." "Ethan," Eleanor started. "No," Ethan shouted. "You don't get to decide. You don't live here. Grace does. She's part of our family now, and you can't take her away." The boys ran upstairs, slamming their door. The silence they left behind was deafening. Patricia spoke first. "This is exactly what we're talking about. The boys have become too attached. It's not healthy." But Jonathan was looking at his mother. "You made the other nannies leave? What does Ethan mean by that?" Eleanor had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I may have expressed concerns to some of them about their methods, their backgrounds. I was only trying to ensure the boys had the best possible care." "You sabotaged them," Jonathan said, understanding dawning. "The nannies didn't quit because of the boys' behavior. They quit because you made them feel unwelcome, because they weren't good enough by your standards. I was protecting my grandsons. You were controlling everything like you always do," Jonathan said. "And Grace is the first person strong enough to withstand your disapproval and stay anyway. That's why you really want her gone, not because she's done anything wrong, but because you can't control her." Eleanor stood up, her face flushed. "How dare you suggest I think you both need to leave," Jonathan said firmly. "Thank you for your concern, but I'll handle my own household from now on." After they left, Jonathan went upstairs and knocked on the boys' door. "Can I come in?" They let him in, and he found them both on Ethan's bed, holding the memory box they'd made with Grace. Their faces were red from crying. "Is Grace going away?" Caleb asked in a small voice. "No," Jonathan said, pulling them both into a hug. "Grace isn't going anywhere. I promise." "Grandma always ruins everything," Ethan said bitterly. "Grandma's scared," Jonathan explained. "Scared of change, scared of losing control, scared that if we move on from missing Mom, somehow that means we didn't love her enough. But she's wrong. We can love Mom and still make room for new people in our lives." "Like Grace," Caleb said. "Like Grace," Jonathan agreed. After he tucked them in, Jonathan sat alone in his study, thinking about everything that had been said. His family's concerns about appearances and propriety, the power dynamics Patricia had mentioned, the possibility that he was putting Grace in an uncomfortable position. He needed to talk to Grace, needed to understand how she felt, what she wanted. But he was terrified of the conversation, terrified of losing her friendship if his feelings weren't returned, terrified of making a move that would destroy the stability his sons finally had. The next morning, he'd make a decision. But tonight he just sat in the dark, thinking about the woman who'd walked into his chaotic life 6 months ago and somehow made everything better. Grace arrived Monday morning to find Jonathan waiting for her in the kitchen. 2 cups of coffee already made. The boys were still sleeping upstairs. He'd asked her to come early, said they needed to talk, and Grace had spent the whole weekend with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She knew about the family meeting. The boys had called her Sunday afternoon, crying, telling her about Grandma and Aunt Patricia wanting her to leave. Grace had reassured them as best she could, but privately she'd been preparing herself for the inevitable. She'd gotten too close, crossed too many boundaries. Jonathan would let her go gently, professionally, and she'd have no one to blame but herself. "Good morning," Jonathan said, handing her a coffee. "Thanks for coming early." "Of course." Grace wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Should I sit down for this?" Jonathan managed a small smile. That might be good. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd shared countless conversations over the past 6 months. Grace steeled herself for what was coming. "I need to apologize," Jonathan began. "My mother and sister way overstepped this weekend. The things they implied about you, about your motivations, it was offensive and completely unfair." "They're worried about you," Grace said quietly. "About the boys. I understand that. They were prejudiced and wrong," Jonathan said firmly. "But they did make me think about some things. About the situation we're in, the complications. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Grace, you've become essential to this family. More than an employee, more than a caregiver. You're part of our lives in a way that's hard to define. Here it comes, Grace thought, the gentle letdown. The "this has gotten too complicated" speech. The thing is, Jonathan continued, I need to know if that makes you uncomfortable. If I've put you in a difficult position by blurring the lines between professional and personal. Because my mother raised a good point. There's a power imbalance here. I'm your employer, and if you've been going along with a closer relationship because you felt you had to, that's not okay. Grace was quiet for a moment, processing this. He wasn't firing her. He was worried about her comfort, her autonomy. Something in her chest loosened slightly. Can I be completely honest? Grace asked. Please. When I took this job, I saw it as exactly that. A job. Good pay, challenging but rewarding work. I wasn't looking for anything beyond a professional relationship. She met his eyes. But somewhere along the way, that changed. I started caring about you and the boys not because I was being paid to, but because I genuinely love you all, and that did complicate things. Jonathan's breath caught at the word love, but Grace continued. I won't pretend the power dynamics aren't real. You're my employer, and that creates an imbalance. If you told me tomorrow that we needed to go back to strict professional boundaries, I'd have to respect that because I need this job. That's the reality, she paused. But I also need you to know that everything I've done, every choice I've made regarding this family has been genuine. I'm not here because of your money or your status. I'm here because I care about two little boys who needed someone to not give up on them, and because I've come to care about their father too. Care how? Jonathan asked softly. Grace took a breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. More than I should, probably. More than is professional or sensible. But I'm 52 years old and I learned a long time ago that life's too short for playing games. So yes, I've developed feelings for you. Real feelings. But I also recognize all the reasons why acting on those feelings would be complicated and potentially problematic. Jonathan felt relief flood through him. What if I told you I have the same feelings? That I've been falling in love with you for months now? Grace's eyes widened. Then I'd say we need to be very careful about how we handle this. Agreed, Jonathan said. So here's what I'm thinking. No more employer-employee relationship. If we're